The soft amber glow of Edison bulbs cast warm shadows across the exposed brick walls of Magnolia Café, where the evening rush had settled into a gentle hum of conversation and clinking ceramic. Steam rose from coffee cups, mingling with the scent of fresh pastries and the faint melody of jazz drifting from hidden speakers. At a corner table near the window, where raindrops traced lazy paths down the glass, a young woman sat with her hands folded carefully in her lap, her eyes scanning the entrance with a mixture of hope and practiced wariness. Isabella Parker wore a soft lavender sweater that brought out the warmth in her dark eyes, her black hair falling in gentle waves around her shoulders. She had arrived 15 minutes early, not from eagerness, but from the careful planning that had become second nature to someone who navigated a world not designed for her. Her fingers unconsciously traced the edge of the small notepad beside her coffee cup, a habit born from years of bridging the gap between spoken words and the silence that had been her companion since birth. The cafe door chimed as it opened, and Isabella's breath caught as she recognized the man from the dating app photos. Tall, with perfectly styled hair and a confident stride that spoke of someone accustomed to making impressions, he scanned the room until his eyes landed on her table. She offered a tentative smile and a small wave, her heart beating faster as he approached. But as he drew closer, something in his expression shifted. The easy confidence faltered, replaced by confusion, then something harder to name. He stopped a few feet from the table, his gaze moving from her face to the notepad, to the way her hands moved slightly as she began to sign hello, before catching herself and switching to a verbal greeting. "Hi, I'm Isabella," she said, her voice carrying the particular cadence of someone who had learned to speak without ever hearing the sound of their own words. "You must be Mark." He didn't sit down. Instead, he remained standing, his expression cycling through disbelief, annoyance, and what looked uncomfortably like disgust. "You didn't mention you were deaf," he said, his voice loud enough that heads at nearby tables turned. Isabella felt heat creep up her neck, the familiar burn of exposure and judgment. "I thought we could talk first, get to know each other," she replied, her hands moving to gesture but stopping midway, suddenly self-conscious. "Does it matter?" Marcus let out a short, harsh laugh that made several patrons look up from their conversations. "Does it matter? Are you serious right now?" His voice carried across the cafe like a stone thrown into still water, creating ripples of uncomfortable silence. "I came here expecting a normal date with a normal girl, not some charity case who can't even hear me talk." The words hit Isabella like physical blows, each one landing with precision in the soft places where her confidence lived. Around them, the warm atmosphere of the cafe seemed to freeze, conversations stopping mid-sentence as people turned to stare at the unfolding scene. An elderly woman at a nearby table gasped softly, her hand flying to her chest. A young couple sharing dessert stopped eating, their faces reflecting the second-hand embarrassment and anger that filled the air. Isabella's hands trembled as she reached for her purse, her carefully practiced composure beginning to crack. "I should go," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sudden quiet that had fallen over the space. But Marcus wasn't finished. "Yeah, you should," he said, his tone cruel and dismissive. "And next time, maybe be honest about what people are getting into. Nobody wants to deal with that level of complication. Nobody wants a broken girlfriend they have to take care of like a child." The silence that followed was deafening in its completeness. Even the background music seemed to have stopped, as if the entire world had paused to witness this moment of cruelty. Isabella stood slowly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound that seemed to echo in the stillness. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her chin remained raised, dignity intact even as her world crumbled around the edges. She gathered her things with careful, deliberate movements, each action a small act of rebellion against the shame that threatened to consume her. The notepad slipped from her hands, fluttering to the floor where it lay open, revealing pages covered in neat handwriting, notes about conversation starters and questions she had prepared, evidence of the hope and effort she had invested in this moment. As she bent to retrieve it, a shadow fell across the table. A man had risen from a booth near the back of the cafe, moving with quiet purpose through the frozen tableau of shocked faces. He was perhaps in his mid-30s, with kind eyes and the sort of calm presence that suggested someone comfortable with both authority and compassion. A little girl with copper curls and bright green eyes followed close behind him, her small hand tucked trustingly in his larger one. The man's gaze fixed on Marcus with a sort of steady intensity that made the younger man shift uncomfortably. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silence but somehow managing to feel private, intimate, as if he were speaking directly to Isabella despite addressing her tormentor. "I couldn't help but overhear, and I think there's been a misunderstanding." Mark turned, his expression defensive and slightly aggressive. "This doesn't concern you, man. Mind your own business." The stranger's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, a subtle straightening that spoke of protective instincts awakening. "Actually, it does concern me," he replied evenly. "You see, my daughter here is learning sign language at school, and she's been excited to practice with someone who might appreciate it. Haven't you, Emma?" The little girl stepped forward, her face serious with the sort of intense concentration only children can muster. She raised her hands and began to sign, her movements careful and deliberate. "I think you're beautiful," she signed, speaking the words aloud as she moved her hands. "And my daddy thinks mean people are the ones who are really broken." Isabella's breath caught in her throat, surprise and something like wonder replacing the hurt in her eyes. She knelt down to the little girl's level, her own hands moving in fluid response. "Thank you," she signed back, her movements graceful and sure. "That was perfectly signed. You're very good at it." Emma beamed, turning to her father with pride. "Daddy, I did it. She understood me." The man smiled down at his daughter, then looked back at Mark, who was now standing awkwardly between tables. The attention of the entire cafe focused on him in a way that was clearly making him uncomfortable. "You know," the man continued conversationally, "I run a company that employs over 200 people. Some of the brightest, most capable employees I've ever had the privilege of working with happen to be deaf. They contribute more to their teams and show more dedication than many hearing employees I've encountered. So when you suggest that someone is broken because they experience the world differently than you do, it makes me wonder what's really broken here." The silence stretched, heavy with judgment and the weight of witness cruelty. Marcus's face reddened, his bravado crumbling under the combined gaze of strangers who had seen him at his worst. "Whatever," he muttered, grabbing his jacket from the back of the chair. This whole thing was a waste of time anyway. He pushed past tables of disapproving diners, his exit hurried and graceless. The cafe door chimed again as it closed behind him, and gradually the normal sounds of evening conversation began to return, though many eyes remained fixed on the corner table where Isabella still knelt beside the little girl. The man extended his hand to help Isabella to her feet, his expression gentle but respectful. "I'm Michael," he said, speaking clearly so she could read his lips. "And this is Emma. I hope you don't mind us interrupting. Emma's been wanting to meet someone who could really teach her about sign language, and when we saw what was happening..." Isabella stood, accepting his offered hand with grace that spoke of someone accustomed to kindness being rare enough to treasure. "Isabella," she replied, her voice stronger now, more sure. "And I don't mind at all. It's not often I meet someone so young who's learning to sign." Emma tugged on her father's sleeve, then began signing again, her face earnest. "Can we ask her to have ice cream with us?" she signed and spoke simultaneously. "I want to learn more words." Michael looked to Isabella, his expression hopeful but careful not to pressure. "We were actually heading out for ice cream after dinner. If you're not busy, and if you'd like some company after." He gestured vaguely toward the door where Mark had departed. "You'd be welcome to join us." Emma could practice her signing, and honestly, after what just happened, I think we could all use something sweet. Isabella felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of the tight knot of humiliation that had formed during Mark's verbal assault. Here was kindness offered without condition, acceptance given freely, and the chance to turn an evening of hurt into something that might actually bring joy. "I'd like that," she said, her smile genuine for the first time all evening. "Ice cream sounds perfect." As they gathered their things and prepared to leave, the elderly woman from the nearby table approached, her eyes kind but fierce. "Honey," she said to Isabella, reaching out to gently touch her arm. "That young man doesn't deserve someone like you. You carry yourself with such grace and dignity. Don't let anyone make you feel less than the remarkable woman you clearly are." Other patrons nodded agreement, and Isabella felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the cafe's ambient lighting. Sometimes, she reflected, the worst moments could crack open to reveal unexpected gifts, unexpected allies, unexpected possibilities for connection. As they walked toward the door, Emma skipped between the adults, her hands moving in the signs she remembered, her chatter a mixture of spoken words and gestural language that felt like music made visible. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the evening air carried the clean scent of washed streets and new beginnings. Michael held the door for Isabella, and as she passed, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the glass, surprised to see not the broken woman Mark had tried to define, but someone surrounded by new friends, someone valued and appreciated for exactly who she was. The ice cream parlor 3 blocks away was the sort of place that still believed in oversized sundaes and the power of sprinkles to heal small wounds. Vintage soda fountain chairs surrounded small round tables, and the walls were lined with photographs of families celebrating birthdays, anniversaries, and ordinary Tuesday evenings that had become memories worth preserving. Isabella found herself seated across from Emma, who had appointed herself as both student and teacher in an impromptu sign language lesson that was equal parts educational and entertaining. "How do you sign, Chocolate?" Emma asked, her small face serious with concentration as she watched Isabella's hands move in fluid demonstration. The little girl's attempts were earnest if imperfect, her fingers stumbling over the complex movements with the sort of determined persistence that only children possessed. Michael watched from his seat beside his daughter, a spoon of vanilla ice cream melting forgotten in his hand, as he observed the interaction with something that looked like wonder. There was something magical about watching his daughter connect with someone new, especially someone who brought such patience and genuine joy to the teaching process. Isabella had a gift with children, he realized, a natural ease that spoke of someone who understood what it meant to be different and had learned to find strength in that difference rather than shame. "Your daughter is remarkable," Isabella said, catching Michael's eye as Emma practiced the signs for various ice cream flavors with the sort of intense focus usually reserved for much more serious pursuits. "Most adults don't pick up signing this quickly. She has a real aptitude for it." Michael felt a flush of parental pride, but also something deeper, a recognition that this woman saw his daughter clearly, appreciated her for her curiosity and enthusiasm rather than simply offering generic praise. "She's always been drawn to communication," he replied. "When we learned that one of her classmates was deaf, she immediately wanted to learn how to talk with him. I think she likes the idea that there are different ways to connect with people." Isabella's expression softened, and Michael caught a glimpse of something vulnerable in her eyes, a flicker of emotion that suggested his words had touched something significant. "That's beautiful," she said quietly. "I wish more people understood that difference doesn't mean deficit. It just means diversity." Emma looked up from her ice cream, which had become more decoration than dessert, as she'd gotten absorbed in practicing signs. "Isabella," she said, carefully pronouncing each syllable, "why was that man so mean to you?" The question hung in the air between them, innocent and direct, in the way that only children's questions could be. Isabella glanced at Michael, who nodded encouragingly, his expression saying that they could handle honest conversation, that Emma was old enough to understand that the world sometimes contained cruelty that needed to be acknowledged and discussed. "Sometimes," Isabella said carefully, "people are afraid of things they don't understand. And sometimes, when people are afraid, they say mean things to try to make themselves feel better. It doesn't make it right, but it helps to understand that his meanness was about his own feelings, not about who I really am." Emma considered this with the sort of thoughtful seriousness that suggested she was filing the information away for future reference. "My daddy always says that mean people are usually sad people," she said. "Maybe that man was just really, really sad." Michael felt his heart constrict with pride and love for his daughter's capacity for empathy, even towards someone who had been cruel to her new friend. "That's very wise," he said, reaching over to smooth a curl away from her face. "Though being sad doesn't give us permission to hurt other people." The conversation continued as they finished their ice cream, moving from serious topics to lighter ones, from Emma's school experiences to Isabella's work as a graphic designer, from Michael's challenges as a single father to Isabella's love of photography. The easy flow of conversation surprised all of them, the way topics connected and built on each other, like a bridge being constructed one plank at a time. By the time they prepared to leave, the summer evening had settled into the soft blue hour, when the world seemed to pause between day and night. Streetlights began to flicker on, casting gentle pools of yellow light on the sidewalks where families walked with the unhurried pace of people savoring the end of a good day. As they stood outside the ice cream parlor, Michael found himself reluctant to let the evening end. There was something about Isabella that had caught his attention from the moment he'd seen her handling Marcus's cruelty with such dignity, but spending time with her had revealed layers of intelligence, humor, and warmth that made him want to know more. "Would you?" he began, then stopped, suddenly uncertain. Emma looked between the two adults, her child's intuition picking up on the unspoken tension. "Daddy wants to ask you on a date," she announced, with the sort of cheerful directness that made both adults laugh, despite their embarrassment. "He gets all nervous when he likes someone." Michael's face reddened, but he didn't deny his daughter's observation. "Well?" he said, looking at Isabella with a mixture of hope and hesitation. "She's not wrong. I was wondering if you might like to have dinner sometime. Somewhere quieter than a cafe full of people. Somewhere we could really talk." Isabella felt her heart skip in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. It had been so long since someone had shown genuine interest in getting to know her, so long since she'd felt the flutter of possibility that came with mutual attraction. "I'd like that," she said, her smile bright enough to compete with the streetlights. "I'd like that very much." They exchanged phone numbers, Michael carefully storing Isabella's contact information in his phone, while Emma insisted on taking a selfie with her new friend. The three of them crowded together under a street lamp like a family portrait waiting to be developed. As they prepared to part ways, Isabella walking toward the bus stop while Michael and Emma headed to their car, Emma broke away from her father's hand and ran back to Isabella, throwing her small arms around the woman's waist in an impulsive hug. "I'm really glad that mean man was horrible," she whispered loudly enough for her father to hear, "because if he hadn't been, we never would have met you." Isabella knelt down to return the hug properly, her eyes meeting Michael's over his daughter's head. In that moment, something passed between them, an understanding that what had started as rescue had transformed into something much more significant. What had begun as one of the worst evenings of Isabella's recent memory had somehow twisted and reshaped itself into one of the best, proof that sometimes the universe conspired in the most unexpected ways to bring the right people together at exactly the right moment. The following weeks unfolded with the sort of gentle progression that characterized the best kinds of love stories, the ones built on foundation of friendship and genuine compatibility rather than dramatic gestures or overwhelming passion. Michael and Isabella discovered that they shared an appreciation for quiet Sunday mornings, independent bookstores, and the sort of documentaries that most people found boring but they found fascinating. Their first official date was dinner at a small Italian restaurant where the owner, upon learning that Isabella was deaf, immediately printed out the evening specials in large, clear font and made sure their table was positioned where Isabella could easily see both Michael's face and the rest of the restaurant. It was the sort of thoughtful accommodation that spoke of a world slowly learning to be more inclusive, one small gesture at a time. Emma became a regular fixture in their developing relationship, her presence adding a dimension of family warmth that neither Michael nor Isabella had anticipated, but both came to treasure. The little girl appointed herself as Isabella's personal sign language student, practicing with the dedication of someone preparing for Olympic competition. Her progress was remarkable. But more remarkable still was the way her friendship with Isabella seemed to increase her confidence in all areas of her life. Michael watched his daughter bloom under Isabella's patient attention, saw her become more outgoing at school, more willing to advocate for her deaf classmate, more curious about the world beyond her immediate experience. It was Isabella who suggested they attend the local deaf community's monthly social gathering, a suggestion that initially made Michael nervous. He worried about his own limited signing skills, about whether he would be accepted in a space that wasn't designed for him, about whether his presence might make Isabella uncomfortable in her own community. But Isabella assured him that deaf culture was characterized by inclusion rather than exclusion, by a desire to bridge gaps rather than maintain them. The community center where the gathering took place was alive with conversation in multiple languages, hands moving in fluid dialogue while voices rose and fell in the complex symphony of a truly multilingual environment. Michael was struck by the energy of the space, the way communication flowed seamlessly between signed and spoken word, the way children and adults moved together in a dance of belonging that transcended the usual social barriers. Emma was immediately adopted by a group of deaf and hearing children who were playing games that required no spoken language, her natural friendliness and basic signing skills making her an instant favorite. Michael found himself in conversation with other parents, some deaf, some hearing, all navigating the beautiful complexity of raising children who moved between different cultural and linguistic worlds. It was Isabella, however, who truly shone in this environment. Michael watched her transform from the careful, slightly guarded woman he had come to know into someone who moved with complete confidence and joy. Her signing was poetry in motion, her laughter rich and unrestrained, her interactions with friends and community members revealing depths of personality that their quieter dates had only hinted at. He found himself falling in love not just with Isabella, as he had come to know her, but with this fuller version of herself, the woman she became when she was completely comfortable in her own skin and community. The evening's entertainment was a storytelling session, where members of the community shared tales both funny and profound, their hands painting pictures in the air that transcended the need for sound. Michael found himself mesmerized by the artistry of it, the way emotions could be conveyed through gesture and expression in ways that sometimes seemed more powerful than words. When Isabella was invited to share a story, she hesitated only briefly before moving to the front of the room, her presence commanding immediate attention. She told the story of their meeting, but not as Michael had expected. Instead of focusing on Mark's cruelty or her own humiliation, she crafted a narrative about unexpected gifts, about how sometimes the worst moments of our lives crack open to reveal the best ones waiting just underneath. She spoke about the gift of Emma's friendship, about the way a child's openness had built a bridge between worlds, about the discovery that love could grow from the smallest seeds of kindness planted at exactly the right moment. Michael felt tears prick his eyes as he watched her transform their story into something universal, something that spoke to everyone in the room about the power of human connection to heal old wounds and create new possibilities. When she finished, the applause was not just polite appreciation, but genuine enthusiasm, the sort of response that comes when a community recognizes one of its own telling a story that captures something essential about their shared experience. As they drove home that evening, Emma asleep in the back seat and Isabella's hand warm in his own, Michael found himself thinking about the nature of communication, about all the ways that people could connect beyond the simple exchange of words. He had learned more about Isabella in one evening surrounded by her community than he had in weeks of careful conversation, had seen her in full color rather than the gentle pastels of their previous interactions. "Thank you," he said quietly, not wanting to wake Emma but needing Isabella to know how significant the evening had been for him. "For sharing that world with us, for letting us be part of something so special." Isabella squeezed his hand, her smile visible in the passing streetlights. "Thank you for wanting to be part of it," she replied, "and for raising a daughter who sees differences as opportunities rather than obstacles." They drove in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts about the evening and what it meant for their growing relationship. Michael found himself thinking about the future in ways he hadn't allowed himself to do in years, imagining Emma growing up bilingual in ways that had nothing to do with nationality, and everything to do with expanding the definition of how human beings could connect with each other. He thought about Isabella becoming a permanent part of their lives, about the richness she would bring not just to his world but to Emma's, about the lessons in empathy and inclusion that would shape his daughter's understanding of what it meant to live in a diverse and beautiful world. When they reached Isabella's apartment building, he walked her to the door as had become their custom, but tonight felt different, weighted with possibility and the sort of significance that comes when people realize they are standing at the threshold of something important. "Isabella," he said, his voice soft but sure, "I need you to know that tonight, watching you with your community, seeing you completely yourself, it made me fall in love with you all over again. Not because you were different than I thought, but because you were exactly who I hoped you were." Isabella's breath caught, her eyes searching his face in the dim light of the building's entryway. "Michael," she began, but he continued, the words flowing now like water finding its proper course. "I know we've been taking things slowly, getting to know each other, making sure Emma was comfortable with the changes, but tonight made me realize that I don't want to take things slowly anymore. I want to build a life with you. I want Emma to grow up seeing your strength and kindness every day. I want to learn to sign well enough to tell you I love you in your first language, even though I hope you already know it from the way I look at you." Isabella's hands moved to frame his face, her touch gentle but sure. "I do know," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "and I want all of those things too. I want to be part of your family, part of Emma's growing up, part of whatever beautiful life we can build together." When he kissed her, it was with the sort of reverence usually reserved for sacred moments, the recognition that they were sealing a promise that would reshape both their futures. Behind them, the city hummed with its late-night energy, but in their small circle of light, the world had narrowed to just the two of them, and the infinite possibilities that stretched ahead. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning when the leaves painted the trees in shades of gold and crimson, Isabella stood in front of the bathroom mirror in the home she now shared with Michael and Emma, her hands trembling slightly as she held a small plastic stick that would determine the direction of their carefully planned future. The two pink lines that appeared seemed to glow with their own light, confirmation of the hope she had barely dared to acknowledge, the dream that had been growing alongside her love for the family that had welcomed her so completely. When she emerged from the bathroom, Michael was in the kitchen making Emma's lunch for school, his movements efficient and familiar as he navigated the morning routine that had become theirs. Emma sat at the kitchen table, practicing the signs Isabella had taught her while she ate cereal that was more milk than grain, her concentration absolute as she worked through her expanding vocabulary. "Daddy," Emma said without looking up from her signing practice, "I dreamed that Isabella had a baby sister for me. Can dreams come true?" Michael paused in his lunch-making, glancing at Isabella with the sort of amused exasperation that came with parenting a child whose intuition often seemed to border on the supernatural. "Well, sweetheart," he said carefully, "sometimes dreams come true, but not always in the way we expect them to." Isabella moved to stand beside him, her hands shaking slightly as she pulled the pregnancy test from behind her back. Michael's eyes widened as he saw what she was holding, his face cycling through surprise, joy, and something that looked like overwhelmed gratitude. "Actually," Isabella said, her voice soft but clear, "sometimes dreams come true exactly the way we hope they will." Emma looked up from her cereal, her child's intuition immediately picking up on the significance of the moment even if she didn't understand all the details. "Is Isabella going to have a baby?" she asked, her voice pitched high with excitement. Michael pulled Isabella into his arms, spinning her around the kitchen while Emma clapped and cheered, the three of them dissolving into laughter and tears and the sort of chaotic joy that comes when a family realizes it's about to grow in the most wonderful possible way. "Yes," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion as he set Isabella down and gathered both her and Emma into a group hug that felt like coming home. "Isabella is going to have a baby, which means you're going to be a big sister." Emma's squeal of delight could probably be heard 3 blocks away, her excitement so pure and overwhelming that it was impossible not to be infected by it. She immediately began planning everything from nursery decorations to the signs she would teach the baby, her natural tendency toward organization coming out in full force as she contemplated her new role as older sibling and sign language instructor. The pregnancy proceeded with the sort of careful attention that comes when people understand they are stewarding something precious. Isabella continued working as a graphic designer, her clients delighted to accommodate her needs as her body changed to accommodate the growing life within it. Michael hovered with the sort of protective attention that was endearing rather than suffocating, his natural tendency toward caution channeled into making sure Isabella felt supported rather than managed. Emma appointed herself as the baby's first teacher, spending hours talking to Isabella's growing belly in a mixture of spoken English and sign language, determined that her sibling would be bilingual from birth. She read picture books aloud while simultaneously signing the stories, her small hands moving in the fluid gestures that had become second nature to her under Isabella's patient instruction. The baby, when it arrived on a snow-covered February morning that turned the world into a crystalline wonderland, was perfect in the way that all babies are perfect, but also perfect in the specific way that comes when a child is born into a family that has been shaped by love, intention, and the understanding that differences are gifts rather than obstacles. Little Grace arrived with dark hair like her mother and her father's steady gaze, but it was her hands that captured everyone's immediate attention, the way her tiny fingers moved even in sleep, as if she were already practicing the language she would learn alongside spoken words. Emma was a devoted big sister from the first moment she held Grace, her 7-year-old hands steady and sure as she supported the baby's head and whispered promises about all the adventures they would share. Isabella watched her 2 daughters together and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible, the love she felt big enough to encompass not just her biological child, but the little girl who had been the bridge that brought them all together. Michael moved through those early days of parenthood with the sort of quiet competence that comes from experience, but also with a wonder that suggested he was seeing fatherhood anew through Isabella's eyes, experiencing the miracle of new life through the perspective of someone for whom every milestone would be discovered, rather than simply remembered. As Grace grew from newborn to infant to toddler, the family settled into rhythms that were uniquely their own, a blend of hearing and deaf culture that enriched all their lives in ways they were still discovering. Grace's first words were spoken and signed simultaneously, her small hands moving in the gestures Isabella had been teaching her since birth, while her voice added sound to meaning in the most natural possible way. Emma proved to be a gifted teacher, her patience with her little sister unlimited as she helped Grace navigate the complex world of dual-language communication. The house filled with the sounds and silences of a family that communicated in multiple ways, where understanding flowed through gesture and expression as easily as through spoken word, where love was expressed in languages that transcended the need for sound. Isabella often found herself thinking about that terrible evening in the cafe, about Mark's cruelty and the shame she had felt in that moment when the world seemed to confirm her worst fears about herself. It seemed impossible now that such pain could have led to such joy, that the worst moment of her year could have been the catalyst for the best years of her life. But that was the nature of transformation, she had learned, the way that breaking open could create space for healing, the way that vulnerability could become the foundation for the deepest connections. One evening, as she sat in the nursery rocking Grace to sleep while Emma practiced piano in the living room and Michael finished cleaning up after dinner, Isabella felt the weight of her gratitude like a physical presence in her chest. The baby in her arms was breathing the steady rhythm of approaching sleep, her small hand curled around Isabella's finger, with the sort of trust that comes from knowing you are completely loved and completely safe. Through the window, snow was beginning to fall again, covering the world in the same pristine white that had welcomed Grace into the world, and Isabella thought about all the unexpected gifts that had come from refusing to let other people's limitations define her worth. She thought about Michael's steady love, about Emma's boundless affection, about the community that had embraced their growing family with such warmth. But mostly, she thought about Grace, about the little girl who would grow up in a world where differences were celebrated rather than merely tolerated, where communication happened in multiple languages, where love was expressed in countless ways, beyond the simple exchange of words. As Grace finally succumbed to sleep, Isabella continued rocking, reluctant to break the spell of this perfect moment, this snapshot of a life that had grown from the seeds of kindness planted on one of the worst nights of her life. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the sharp edges of the world in softness, transforming the familiar landscape into something magical and new. Inside, a family slept in the peace that comes from knowing you are exactly where you belong, with exactly the people who see you clearly and love you completely, and exactly the life you were meant to live.